Okay, so on to another key theme, and that is the theme between men and women and the differences between them. So just as normal, I've got a whole host of points to show you, a whole host of quotes I want to go through with you, and I've colour coded them so you can see where they match the mark scheme throughout. So, how does Priestley present the differences between men and women? This is an example of a question that I've given, but they could dress this up in any host of ways. But essentially, what we're talking about today is the differences between men and women. Now, Priestley is showing that women live a life of subordination, meaning they're the second class, they're inferior to the men. But there's no desire to change this status quo. There is almost an acceptance that is their place in society. Now, this is a sad irony, for it is the women that have more empathy and understanding of the inspector's message, but their marginalisation means they cannot make a difference. Because no one listens to them, it doesn't matter how much they believe and agree with the inspector and socialism, they can't make the difference they could do with the world without with greater support and understanding from their male counterparts. So, the points I have to make, I couldn't narrow it down to 4 here, so I've got 5, I'm afraid. First of all, I'll be making the point that class does not shield you from gender limits. We've got Sybil, an upper class woman who's being told to go and congratulate the cook. Then I'll be looking at how female subordination is so ingrained that even the women endorse it, and that's again shown through Mrs. Birling referring to Eva as girls of that class. Now, I would also be looking at how unobtainable this perfect man is. The man of love, the man of empathy, the man of loyalty, he does not exist. It suggests there's a hopeless situation for women in the world trying to find a man that's going to look after them and protect them the way they feel they want to be protected. Now, this is where I show the point I was making in the introduction, where Sheila understands the inspector's message, but she is powerless to make any sort of difference, and this is shown through Mother, I begged you and begged you to stop. Finally, I'll be using that killer massive quote, an animal a thing, not a person, to show how men can use their power over women for their own benefit and then just cast them aside when they're done and finished with them. So, first of all, Sybil, go tell cook. So, Mrs. Birling is an upper class woman. She's married beneath herself to be married to Mr. Birling, but even she still has to conform to the limits of a woman, and she's only limited to the affairs of the house and the family. Now, this reflects the middle class male attitude in 1912. Mr. Birling is not going to go down to the cook's level, who's highly likely to be a woman to be a cook in 1912, and he's not going to go and congratulate her himself. He would not believe it would be fitting of him to be going into the kitchen, to go and speak to just the cook, to go and congratulate her on the quality of his dinner. This is shown by the fact he doesn't even give her a name or identity, but just refers to her as cook. She means nothing to him. Now, this imperative here, the command, Sybil, go tell cook, that implies there's an expectation of obedience. He's not expecting a dispute or a question of his superiority in the household from his own wife. Now, I'll be looking at Freytag's theory of dramatic structure here. Freytag would argue that because this has been established at the very start of the play, this foreshadows how this male dominance is going to be key, it's going to run all the way through the plot, and it's going to prove quite costly as the plot and the play continues. Right, then I'll be looking at how Mrs. Birling just refers to Eva as girls of that class. So this female subordination, this weakness of the female gender is so ingrained that even women endorse it. Even a prominent member of this women's charity is belittling other women. There's so much we want to say about this. First of all, girls. Eva is old enough and responsible enough to be mothering Mrs. B's grandchild, yet she's disrespecting her by just referring to her as a girl. This also shows the morality of women is judged by their class. Mrs. Birling is looking at Eva as a lower class woman and therefore assuming that she must be a woman of immorality. But this is massively ironic because it's actually Mrs. Birling who is the one with the low morals, the one who is judgmental, the one that is stubborn and will not move. Now, this also shows the hopelessness for women in 1912. For the people that are meant to be helping them, the people who are working for these charities are just as judgmental and therefore just as limiting their life chances as any male and anyone else in the upper classes. Right, then I'll be looking at Wonderful Fairy Prince, which I think is a fabulous quote for your exams because there's so much to say. First of all, the fact that Sheila refers to Gerald as this wonderful fairy prince shows that the love, the empathy, the loyalty that she desires, that she craves in her husband does not exist. She is in love, just like Eva, with a version of Gerald that is not real. They both fell in love with someone they thought he actually isn't. Now, Gerald is so rich in terms of his treatment of women and what we might want to say about him and how that shows us about the male treatment of women. He's engaged to Sheila here, but he's visiting the Palace Bar, which is highly hinted as an immoral place. He lies and cheats on his fiancée, but then he just feels he could be excused and remain engaged at the end and just starts giving her back her ring. The worst part of all this for me is that Mr. B then defends him. What kind of dad defends the geezer who's cheating on his daughter? But they do, because that's how ingrained the male dominance and control is in society. Men can do whatever they want with their women and with other women, and there is nothing that really can be questioned about them. Now, I'll be looking at the language choices here. Fairy. First of all, the fact that she refers to him as a fairy shows her childish, protected upbringing. She's been kept naive, so she can't make a difference to this world and she can't see the truth of what she's doing. But also, fairy's not real. The same way Eric's love for either of them is also not real. It's just a fantasy like a fairy. But he's also like a prince. He's the top of society, reflecting on his class, and therefore the power he has over women because of his reputation and his financial strength. Because of his reputation, he can be married to Sheila regardless how immoral and cruel a husband he is to her. But also that financial strength and that meant that the desperation of Eva led her to him, and he can still command the loyalty of the Birling family because of his class and because of his money, even though he treats Sheila horrendously. Then I'll be looking at the women, because we've talked enough about the men now, and let's look at Sheila, who's begging you not to stop. Now, Sheila understands the inspector's message, but she's powerless to make a difference. She's so marginalised by her family because of her gender that even though she wants to stop her mother, she wants to show her mother the right way of doing things and wants to stop her embarrassing herself, she's just being ignored, and therefore the mother embarrasses herself, and then it becomes all the more horrific for everyone. Now, the fact she's repeating that word begging and begged, the repetition shows the act of desperation. She's so keen to protect her mum, she so wants to look after her, and she so wants to see change in the world, but because of her gender, her situation is hopeless and she's completely marginalised. I would look at this word mother. This has shifted from mummy. At the start of the play she referred to her as mummy, and now she's referring to her as mother. Now I think that's priestly, showing that there can be a change. If women are exposed to the truth of the world, Sheila can now mature. She no longer has a blind love and loyalty for her mum, and therefore she's far more equipped to make a difference to the world, recognise her responsibilities, and therefore start implementing the socialist values that Priestley craves. And then I'll be ending with this line: an animal, a thing, not a person. Now this shows the males using their power and their status, and Eva's desperation and need for love and support for their own gain. So they treat her like livestock in that they're just using her for her own gain. They use her for sexual gratification, they use her for their emotional balance, for comfort, and when they're just satisfied with her and had enough of her, both of them just socially slaughter her. Gerald particularly, Eric not so much, but they both could have done more to look after her, protect her, and both of them essentially leave her on her own by the end. But she's also like a pet to them, that she provides them with a little bit of short-term comfort and satisfaction, but she can't have the same privilege and luxury as them as her male owners, and therefore it cannot last and it cannot be sustained. Now I'd also be looking at that word, a thing. She's just an object for their gratification and their life improvement, and there is no human connection or emotion that they attach to her as time goes on. Having said all this is all very one-dimensional currently at the minute, and this is rich, it's good stuff to say about this quote, but it's not all, and you've got to look at the other things they say. You've got Gerald, who walks out on his own, rather more upset about this whole business, and Eric, who passionately tells his family that I needed her. So then we've got to be looking and considering this disconnect between their emotions and their actions, and what does this show about them? These are two lads who seem to be quite passionate about the fact they cared about her, but their actions determine or suggest that they simply didn't. So is this show the lack of understanding of how to treat people? Is this simply their naivety? Or is this a desperation for emotional support, but because of their privileged position in society as upper-class, rich males, that this turns into an abuse of that power simply to satisfy their own selfish needs? That's the sort of high-level conversation and discussion that you'd want to be having in your exam. So there you have it. Those are the points I'll be making about the differences between men and women. Very best of luck, and I hope it all goes well for you.